Welcome to Make a Path Presents. My name is Ronnie Hayes, and today we're going to talk about a fun little topic that I always get questions about. How I rate the comic books, how I rate the TV show, and then how I rate them together. There's different ways to do it. Let's just jump right into it. I get this question a lot, especially where people want to know, what do I like better, the comic or the show? And I guess I could just pick one. Me, I've always felt like I like them both for different reasons. You know, one is a comic book with images, and one is a TV show with visuals and actual, living characters that you can feel the charisma off the actors, not just the characters off the page. But anyway, getting into how I rate them, and this is what confuses a lot of comic book fans that are unhappy or happy with what they see brought to the TV show. I will let you know right now, probably the most confused are the comic book fans that hate or disagree with what gets brought onto the show from the comic. And a lot of them don't understand why I'll like something for the show, but then I'm kind of disappointed on how the story from the comic translated into that. So first thing first is I like to rate the show as is. And a lot of times I am able to not even think about the comic when I'm watching the show. A lot of times I get drawn into the show, and sometimes there's just parts that I cannot separate. In the back of my head, I know how it turns out in the comic, and for whatever reason, I can't keep that, I can't stop from thinking about that and judging and comparing. But it's not that often. A lot of times I can sit there and be absorbed in the TV show and not be judging and comparing it to what happened in the comic. I just kind of soak up the material and then feel if I like it or not. So I do rate the show separately. And then as far as the comic, that's an easy one. I rate the comic because it's not based off anything. The comic is the original material. I'll read the comic and then I just rate it based on the comic. I rarely ever read the comic and judge it based on what is going to be coming to the show. Sometimes I get excited, like the Whispers story arc, when that first, when the big reveal came with the Whispers, no spoilers, but when the big reveal came, I was like, oh, I want to see this in the show so bad, so bad. The Walking Dead probably has the most potential to be the creepiest season, or at least intro to a season ever. Whatever they do, anyway, I don't want to spoil it, but oh man, it could be done with a creep factor, and it could be so chilling, something that, just to your core, if done right. And I wanted to see that on the show. So, but then we go into remixes from the show, from the comic to the show. Now, how I judge that, it's kind of like a three-way thing. First off, this is after I look at the show for just being the show separately, outside of the comic. If it was just its own original show, I don't like to judge it on what they should bring from the comic. I don't like condemning it because they don't bring the comic material. I think that's unfair, because this is based on the comic. Now, I will be one of the first saying we should reward comic fans with putting comic material in the show. But in the same strength, I like to balance that off with saying we should not condemn the show for it not utilizing all the comic material. That could be hypocritical. I find it to be a nice even balance. Like, for example, Andrea in the comic hooks up with Rick, and right now after episode 6, it looks like Sasha, who is becoming more of comic book Andrea, is going to hook up with Abraham. You know what I mean? Like, it's remixed like that, so it gives the comic book fans some of that comic material, but it switches the characters around a little. Now, a lot of comic fans that are hardcore, strictly comic fans would hate on that and say, no, we need Andrea, and unfortunately she's dead, so they just hate it regardless. But we need Andrea, and she must get with Rick. Absolutely 100%. If it's not that way, I hate it. I'm not that way. I'm like, you know what? You gave us some comic material, but you remixed it. You tweaked it. So what I do is, and I talked about this before, in the comic there was a character named Billy and Ben, and Andrea and Dale adopted them. Now, in the TV show, it was Lizzie and Mika, and instead of adopting them, it was after the prison was destroyed, Tyrese and Carol went on the run with them. And it was very similar because Lizzie was touched, and the other child in the comic, I think, was it Billy? I think it was Billy. He was touched. Or Ben. I don't know. But, so you could see how they took the same story, essentially, and it's remixed. In the show, it's different. In the comic, it was epic because Carl Grimes, and I'm gonna do a comic spoiler, but it's old as shit, so I don't care. In the thing, Billy kills Ben, or Ben kills Billy, but one of the kids guts the other one, and he's laying down with a knife. Andrea comes over, and he's like, it's okay, I didn't hurt his brain, he'll come back. Now that's very similar to what they did with Lizzie in the TV show. Now, then they stick him in the van, and all the adults are saying, oh, what do we do with this kid? What do we do with this kid? And they go to bed, and Carl sneaks into the van, and the boy is like, are you afraid of me? And Carl's like, no, I'm not. And then you hear a gunshot, and Carl killed him. And it was like epic. And because Carl's like 9, in that part of the story, something like that, 9 or 10. And it was just like, holy shit, Carl is stepping up. Now in the show, that would have been epic. Carl's age is a problem. Lizzie being a chick now, it's a problem. It kind of would have came off the wrong way, been a little too dark, made people not like Carl as much. I don't know, people might have loved him for it. However, they did this shit with Carol and Lizzie, which was heartbreaking and beautiful, I thought. Now, the shit in the comic was awesome, what they did with that storyline. The shit in the show was awesome, how they did it with Carol and everything. It's one of my favorite parts. I love that. I love that whole setup and everything. Now, when I sit back and rank them, I love what they did in the comic. I love what they did in the show. So this version that got remixed is pretty much a tie for me. I love both. And it's so nice sitting back and being like, man, we got this story in the comic and it was awesome and I loved it. And we also got this very similar story in a TV show, but it was different enough to be, to just suck you in and immerse you in what's going on. So I loved it. And it's like a tie for me. And it's so nice, like I said, having the same story, but remixed a way where you love both of it. That doesn't always happen, but what I like to do is judge the show by itself, but when it remixes the part of the comic into the show, I like to either admit, yes, I like the comic version better, or I like the show version better, or I like them both, epic. And that is different for a lot of the different remixes. It's never the same. It's not always liking the show remixes better because there's comic material that I just liked better. I will probably say I openly enjoyed the Governor's story more in the comic, but there's a lot of shit in the show, especially David Morrissey as the actor. I liked what he did. I just felt like the Governor was too tame. He was sick and twisted, and another thing they remixed when I call it the Governor's Redemption. I felt like Season 3 didn't suck me in as much with the Governor, but when it came to Season 4 and how they did the Governor's story, for me it was like, as a comic book fan, it was the redemption of the Governor's storyline, because I loved it. Putting the walkers in the lake there and having it calling back to the fish head tanks. The tanks with not fish heads, the tanks with heads in it. So I guess, to come back full circle, I guess the bottom line is I don't rate it or judge it as a whole, like the entire comic book series versus the entire TV show series. That's not how I do it. I do it in pieces. There's parts I like better in the comic, there's parts I like better in the show, there's parts that I absolutely love and enjoy that are remixes of the same part in both the show and the comic. Just like the Ben and Billy and the Lizzie and Mika. It's a tie with that. And there's a lot of things from the comic book into the show that are the same way. So that is kind of complicated, but that's how I view it as a fan of both the comic book and the show. Sometimes I think fans of the comic would enjoy it more if they looked at it as getting like a double scoop of ice cream. Instead of saying, okay, we had the comic book and then we're going to have the show, and the show is an exact replica of the comic book, this is where we get the comic material, and we're still getting the comic book, but we're getting the show, and it's remixed in a way where we're getting it, freshened up in a different way. It's not the same exact thing. Now, yes, this is coming from the same guy who strongly believes they need a 3D animated exact, transfer of the comic into this 3D animated TV series that wouldn't be on TV. It would be like a digital Blu-ray release or something like that. That's a whole nother story. Every time I try to talk about that, I confuse people so much with what I mean. So I am going to come up with a video to clarify everything. That's down the line, because that's something I don't want right now. I don't think the time is right now. I think in a few years, maybe 10 years, it would be perfect for that. But anyway, you let me know what you think and about my ways of how I judge and rate it. But also let me know what you think for yourself when you're judging the show, if you're a comic fan. If you're just a TV fan, you never read the comic, how do you feel when you hear stories of the comic? Do you like the stories of the comic less because you're so connected to the show? Or I'm not going to limit it. Whatever your thoughts and feelings are between judging and rating the comic book, the show, or the comic and the comic and show together, comparing it and judging it for how it brings the comic stories to life, just put that all down in the comment box. I would love to hear your opinions on that. I'm done talking. It's your turn.
Subscribe now.